The sound of his cane tapping the cracked sidewalk echoed down East 187th Street. Slow. Deliberate. One step, then another. The locals barely looked up. Just an old man. Harmless. Harmless in a neighborhood where kids got shot for sneakers, where sirens were lullabies, and graffiti was written in blood more often than spray paint. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that this quiet, fragile silhouette walking beneath the orange glow of broken streetlights was on his way to commit an act of war. Not the kind of war waged with tanks and uniforms. No. This was something colder, older, personal. The kind of war you only fight when justice has failed you, and you've got nothing left to lose. His name was Harold Thomas. 78 years old. Vietnam veteran. Retired librarian. And grandfather to Malik Thomas, a 16-year-old boy who had been beaten, stabbed, and left for dead in an alley not 3 blocks from where Harold now walked. The police called it a random act of violence. Case of mistaken identity. Wrong place, wrong time. But Harold knew better. The boy was targeted. Not because of who he was, but because he wasn't one of them. Because in a city where power was decided by fear, Malik was light. The kind of light that made darkness flinch. And in that neighborhood, that kind of light didn't live long. It had been 38 days since the murder. Harold had counted every one. He'd waited for police reports. 4 phone calls. 4 names. He sat through empty conversations with detectives who gave him nothing but hollow reassurances and pamphlets about grief. He watched them write his grandson off like a statistic. Another black boy killed in the Bronx. Another number. Another headline. Another forgotten face. But Harold hadn't forgotten. Couldn't forget. Because the last time he saw Malik, he had promised to keep him safe. And now, every day was punishment for that broken promise. He hadn't fired a gun in decades. Hadn't spoken of the jungle. Of the operations. Of the things he'd seen, or done. For years, Harold had told himself that part of him was buried. Gone. That the soldier had died when the uniform came off. But when he stood over Malik's coffin, when he saw the bruises on that beautiful face, something shifted. Something ancient inside him exhaled. And opened its eyes again. He started small. Quiet. Asking questions in corner stores. Sitting outside schools. Watching. Listening. No one took him seriously at first. Just a nosy old man who didn't belong. But Harold was patient. And more importantly, invisible. People saw him, but didn't really see him. They underestimated him. They whispered things near him. They dismissed his presence as irrelevant. And that was their first mistake. Through snippets of overheard conversation and carefully placed questions, he began to form a picture. Names surfaced. Faces. A pattern. There was a gang, the Trinitarios, that had expanded its reach deeper into the Bronx in recent years. Ruthless, organized, and untouchable. Their presence wasn't loud. It was systemic, embedded into the blocks like concrete. Not just corner boys, but influence in barbershops, bodegas, even police precincts. And through all that, one name kept floating to the top. Carlos "Crush" Mendoza. A street-level warlord with a thirst for control and a reputation for making people disappear. Harold had heard the name before. Whispers. Hushed warnings. But he hadn't cared. Until now. Until Malik. Until it became personal. He began following Crush's movements. Not close. Not yet. Just enough to know his routines. His weak spots. His vulnerabilities. Crush was smart. Paranoid. Surrounded by layers of muscle. But also arrogant. Too arrogant to notice a man with a gray beard and a limp watching him from a distance. One night, Harold returned home and opened an old footlocker in the back of his apartment. Inside, among yellowed letters and medals he never displayed, was the notebook. Leather-bound. Weathered. Inside were maps. Diagrams. Tactical notes from a life he thought he'd buried. But that night, sitting alone under the dim light of a flickering lamp, Harold began writing again. Not memories. Plans. He still didn't know exactly who had taken Malik's life. But he knew where they hid. He knew who protected them. And he knew how systems like this worked. You didn't fight them head-on. You disassembled them. Patiently, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to stand on. The first strike came without a sound. Diego Morales, a 17-year-old recruit for the Trinitarios, known for his loose tongue and eagerness to prove himself, was found in an alleyway just off Belmont Avenue. He was alive, but unconscious, tied with zip cords, a bruise above his temple. No witnesses, no blood, just a folded piece of paper taped to his chest. On it, in neat, blocky handwriting, "You know what you did." It was a message, not to Diego, to the rest of them, to Crush. From that moment on, fear changed shape in the neighborhood. The streets, once ruled by noise and swagger, grew quieter. There was talk of a ghost, an angel of death. Some said it was Malik's father. Others, a retired assassin. A few even believed it was Malik himself, returned to avenge his death. But none of them knew the truth. Harold Thomas didn't believe in ghosts. He just believed in consequences. But the calm wouldn't last. Not in the Bronx. Not with men like Crush watching their empire wobble. Within days, retaliation came. Harold's building was surveilled. A man he didn't recognize lingered outside his door. His mailbox was broken into. A message scratched into his apartment door, "Old dogs get put down." He didn't flinch. He didn't call the police. He simply flipped the lock, turned off the lights, and waited. At 3:11 a.m., two men broke in. What they found inside was not an old man cowering behind a couch. It was Harold, seated at the kitchen table, with a flashlight pointed directly at their faces, blinding them long enough for him to pull the small metal baton hidden beneath his coat. Two movements. Two collapses. No blood. No death. Just swift, surgical precision that left both men moaning on the ground as Harold tied their wrists to the radiator and called 911 anonymously. He left before the cops arrived. And when they did, when they found the two assailants tied and gagged, the message was clear. Someone was fighting back, and doing it better than anyone expected. What Harold didn't know, however, was that this wouldn't end with a few broken arms and warnings. The walls were closing in. Crush had begun to connect the dots. The ghost had a face now, and that face had a name. But Harold, he wasn't hiding anymore. Harold knew the clock had started ticking the moment those two boys were carried out on stretchers. He could feel it in the way the air changed around his building, in the way shadows lingered longer on his hallway walls, in the way the corner bodega clerk stopped looking him in the eye. The Trinitarios were many things: violent, territorial, arrogant, but they weren't stupid. And once they realized their target wasn't just some ghost, but a man made of blood, bone, and breath, the hunt would begin. He didn't wait for it. Instead, Harold adjusted. He changed apartments, moved 2 blocks east into a forgotten brownstone with a landlord who didn't ask questions and a fire escape that led directly to the alley behind a closed church. He didn't sleep much anymore. But he didn't need to. Decades ago, in the jungles of Pleiku, he'd learned to rest with one eye open, with one ear tuned to the shift in wind. And now those instincts, once dulled by routine and age, had returned like muscle memory. Like breathing. His days were split in silence. In the morning, he walked to the public library as if nothing had changed. He wore the same beige coat, drank the same coffee from the same cart, nodded to the same security guard. But beneath that coat, tucked in a shoulder holster stitched into an old military vest, sat the same revolver he'd kept hidden for nearly 50 years. Unregistered, untraceable, cold steel heavy with history. Not a weapon for intimidation. A weapon for resolution. By afternoon, Harold was in the shadows. Not stalking prey, not yet, but gathering, watching. He mapped their networks, traced cash movements between bodegas, identified the burner phones, saw who came in, who went out, who delivered the money, and who collected. He moved like fog through the Bronx, drifting from laundromats to church basements to basketball courts where street kids bartered sneakers for protection. He wasn't alone anymore. That was the most unexpected part. People started to notice him, not as a target, but as a symbol. Kids whispered about the Abuelo de Hierro. Mothers, worn down by years of burying sons, began to watch him with something rare in their eyes. Not pity, but hope. And among those who had long stopped believing in justice, Harold was becoming a flicker. A threat to the order of fear. That's how he met Tony Vega, a 50-something ex-Marine who now drove a dollar van on Fordham Road. Broad shoulders. Deep scars. 2 sons. One in prison, the other in a casket. She didn't ask Harold what he was doing. She just handed him a prepaid burner phone and said, "If you're going to start a war, you better not fight it alone." Then came Jasmine Alston, a former caseworker who had been fired for reporting misconduct in a local youth outreach program. A program she would later discover was laundering money for the very same gang Harold was hunting. Jasmine didn't want revenge. She wanted structure. She wanted to help him build something bigger than retaliation. And finally, there was Officer Miguel Arce. Young, smart, disillusioned, working inside the 48th precinct where files went missing and cases were accidentally closed. Miguel had watched too many families bury their kids while his superiors looked the other way. The day he saw Harold's file marked with a red stamp, volatile civilian, possible vigilante, was the day he reached out. One night, the 4 of them sat in the back of a Dominican bakery after hours. The air smelled like burnt sugar and gunpowder. Miguel laid out a blueprint of the Trinitarios hierarchy. Jasmine cross-referenced city grant records with fake non-profit IDs. Tony ran surveillance recon on 3 key stash houses. Harold just listened. He didn't speak unless it mattered. But when he did, his voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "We don't go loud," he said. "Not yet. You take down the whole tree by cutting off its roots. Not just the leaves." So they began. Quietly. Piece by piece. First came the laundromat on East 179th, where cash from weekend drops was washed under fake names. Jasmine created a chain of evidence linking the building's ownership to a councilman who publicly denounced gang violence and privately funded after-hours youth mentorship nights hosted by Crush himself. Miguel delivered it to a journalist he trusted. The story ran in the Village Voice. No arrests, but pressure. Then came the trap house above the bodega, where underage kids were held, trained, and deployed as runners. Tony posed as a city inspector and delivered photos of black mold, fire code violations, and illegal modifications. Within 72 hours, the Department of Buildings condemned the structure. The Trinitarios lost one of their key spots. But they also noticed, and that was the risk. Every move, every leak, every chip they carved out of Crush's empire made the walls tremble. But it also made Crush sharper, meaner, paranoid. He started burning phones weekly, moved his stash locations, started watching his own men. People disappeared. Others reappeared with bruises and stitched lips. And in the middle of that storm, Harold received a message. Not written, spoken. A trembling teenager, no older than Malik, approached him on the corner of Tremont and 3rd Avenue. No gang beads. No threats. Just a cracked voice and eyes swollen from fear. He said, "You have 7 days," the boy stammered. "Or they're coming for you. Not just you. Everyone who helped you." Then he ran. Harold didn't chase him. He just stood there, watching, counting the seconds, listening to the wind. 7 days. 7. A countdown. A challenge. A signal. But for Harold, it wasn't a death sentence. It was an invitation. 7 days. That's what the boy had said, his voice cracking with every syllable. Not a threat. A prophecy. 7 days until they came for Harold. Until they erased him. Until the order of the Bronx, the silence, the fear, the rules unwritten but brutally enforced, returned to normal. But Harold Thomas didn't believe in deadlines. He believed in openings. In opportunity hidden within the illusion of inevitability. 7 days wasn't a death sentence. It was time. Time to prepare. To strike. To remind them that while they ruled with fear, he was built with patience. And steel. The night after the warning, Harold sat alone in his new apartment. The room was dark but for a single desk lamp. The revolver sat on the table, gleaming like the memory of something violent. Outside, the rain fell softly, tapping against the glass in rhythmic defiance. He thought of Malik, of his laugh, of the way he used to say, "Gramps, One day you'll finally let me fix that ancient coffee machine." That machine still sat in the corner. Cold. Silent. Like the heart of the home it used to fill. Harold closed his eyes and did what he hadn't done in years. He meditated. The way his unit used to before a night op. Clear mind. Steady breath. Accept the possibility of death. Then reject it. And plan. By the second day, the team was already in motion. Tony had assembled a list of every known Trinitario corner in the borough. She didn't just have names. She had habits, routines, soft targets. Jasmine tapped into her network of former social workers and recovered sealed complaints from mothers who had tried, and failed, to get help before their children were pulled into the gang. Miguel quietly pulled internal memos showing known corruption links between Crush's lieutenants and officers on the Trinitarios' payroll. It was all coming together. A house of cards about to be breathed upon. But they couldn't just expose the truth. They had to make a scene. They had to make the public see it. They had to set a trap. And so Harold devised the theater. It would be public, bold, dangerous, but poetic. Day 4, Jasmine leaked a rumor to a trusted journalist that Crush was hosting a peace talk with local activists in a warehouse by the river. A move meant to save face, show community effort, deflect attention from the growing heat. The journalist tweeted it, then deleted it, but not before it was screen-capped, reshared, and spun into a local whisper storm. Crush, who monitored social media through burner phones like a digital hawk, saw it and panicked. He called the meeting, exactly as planned. But it would not be a peace talk. It would be his unraveling. Miguel secured the warehouse. Abandoned for years, once used to store city electrical equipment. He reactivated the power manually and wired a single grid of floodlights to the rafters, all tied to a remote trigger. Tony prepared the perimeter with ex-military precision. Escape routes, fallback zones, vantage points. She didn't carry a gun. She carried a camera. She would document everything. And Harold? He wrote a letter. To Crush. Delivered through the same trembling boy from before. The message was short. I accept your invitation. 7th night. Come unarmed. Or don't come at all. Either way, I'll be waiting. And then, the final days ticked by. 5, 4, 3. The city began to hum with tension. Harold could feel it in the streets. Fewer eyes met his. More whispers followed him. He heard the word abuelo, spoken behind closed doors like an urban myth. The community didn't know what he was planning. But they knew something was coming. And some of them began to choose sides. Day 6, a woman knocked on his door. Late 30s, braids tied back, tears in her eyes. Her name was Rosa. Her son had been recruited last summer. She handed Harold a flash drive. Surveillance footage. A conversation. Her son, resisting in order to hurt another boy. Crush threatening him. The video ended with her son being dragged out of frame. She said nothing else. Just, make this mean something. Harold nodded. He now had his closing act. The 7th night arrived quietly. No fireworks. No loud engine roars. The Bronx fell into a silence it hadn't known in years. People stayed indoors. Lights were dimmed. Windows cracked open just enough for ears to hear what eyes wouldn't dare watch. At 11:17 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up to the warehouse. Crush stepped out. He wasn't alone. 6 men. All armed. All ready. Except, they never made it inside. The moment Crush crossed the warehouse threshold, the floodlights activated. Blinding white. The kind used in military search operations. Cameras switched on. A drone overhead streamed everything live to Jasmine's anonymous YouTube channel. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Harold. Not in armor. Not in anger. Just in a black coat, hands behind his back, eyes locked on the man who had ruled with fear for over a decade. You came, Harold said. Crush didn't speak at first. He squinted into the light. Tense. Confused. Then he grinned. You're braver than I thought, old man. No, Harold said. Just more tired of waiting. At that moment, Miguel stepped out of the shadows. Badge in one hand. Warrant in the other. Crush's grin faltered. What the? Miguel tossed the papers to the floor. You're not under arrest yet. But you're out of time. On the screen behind them, the footage from Rosa's flash drive began to play. And then the warehouse doors slammed shut. The warehouse felt like the inside of a pressure cooker. White industrial lights bore down from above, slicing shadows across the floor in long surgical lines. Cameras clicked in the corners. Red recording dots blinked like quiet snipers. The air was heavy, not just with dust, but with something ancient, reckoning. Carlos "Crush" Mendoza stood in the middle of it, frozen. His eyes darted between Harold, Miguel, the flashing screens behind him, and the warehouse doors that had just slammed shut. For the first time in years, the man who ruled the Bronx through fear wasn't sure which way was out. On the massive projector at the far wall, grainy footage began to play. A timestamp flickered in the corner. 8 weeks prior. The interior of a small room came into focus. Graffiti on the walls, a dirty mattress, a bare bulb swinging overhead. The camera, clearly hidden, showed a teenage boy, nervous, hesitant, standing before Crush. "You want to stay with us?" Crush's voice echoed from the footage, slow and venomous. "Then you do what I say, or I make you disappear like Malik." Gasps rippled through the room, from Tony and Jasmine hidden behind crates with handheld cameras, from Miguel standing silently by a steel support beam, and from a small monitor broadcasting the scene live to a private journalist feed. And then, in real time, Harold took a single step forward. "Say his name again," Harold said quietly, the words cutting like razors. "Say my grandson's name again." Crush turned, eyes hard. But his arrogance was cracking. It was visible now, in his posture, his hands twitching slightly, his chest rising a little too fast. "You think this little show scares me?" he barked, forcing bravado. "You think I care about footage? About some punk with a camera?" "No," Harold replied, stepping closer. "But you care about your name. And tonight, your name dies." Crush snapped. He lunged toward Harold with a roar, reaching, grabbing, shoving. But Harold didn't fall. He stood. Even as Crush's fist clenched around the collar of his coat, Harold held his ground like stone. Their faces inches apart. And in that moment, that breathless pause where time froze, Crush saw it. The eyes. Not of an old man. Not of prey. But of a predator. The kind that doesn't scream. Doesn't flinch. Just waits. For the perfect moment to strike. Harold whispered. "I buried friends in Vietnam, boy. You think you scare me?" Suddenly, clack, the hammer of Miguel's service weapon was cocked. "Step away from him," Miguel said coldly. "Now." Crush hesitated, then let go, stepped back. But his smile returned. Twisted, sharp. "This is all bullshit," he said, arms half raised. "You ain't got nothing. No judge will back this. You're just a washed-up vet and a couple of broke-ass snitches." Jasmine stepped forward now, tablet in hand. She tapped the screen. A second video began playing on the wall. This one was worse. It showed Crush at a so-called youth outreach event. He was handing envelopes, cash, to 2 precinct officers. Clear faces. Clear audio. Promises exchanged like candy. Silence for loyalty. Violence buried under signatures. Crush paled. His men behind him started shifting uncomfortably. Harold spoke again, now calm, almost sorrowful. "You built a kingdom out of fear. Out of boys who never had a father. Out of mothers too tired to keep fighting. You preyed on weakness and called it strength. But what happens when the fear is gone, Carlos?" Crush's jaw clenched. "I built something," he hissed. "Something real." "No," Harold said. "You built a prison. And tonight, the locks are open." Suddenly, a voice came through the speakers, a live feed from a cell phone mic across the street. It was Rosa, the mother who had delivered the footage, now standing at a local community rally, reading the names of children killed or recruited by Crush's gang. Her voice echoed through the warehouse like a funeral bell. Names. One by one. Her voice cracked. But she didn't stop. And as she read the final name, Malik Thomas, Harold bowed his head. That was the breaking point. 2 of Crush's own men dropped their weapons. One of them, shaking, stepped forward. "I didn't sign up for this, man. I didn't kill no kid. I want out." Crush turned. Betrayal lit his eyes. "You weak piece of..." But before he could finish, Tony stepped into the light, camera still rolling. "You're done," she said flatly. "We're streaming this to over 14,000 people. Right now. Every second. Every word." Miguel raised his badge. "Carlos Mendoza, you are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and accessory to the murder of Malik Thomas and others unnamed. You have the right to remain silent." Crush didn't move, didn't flinch, until he saw Harold reach into his coat. Not for the revolver, but for a photo. It was Malik, smiling. Harold held it up for him to see. "This is who you took from me." Crush's eyes darted away. And in that moment, not when the cops stepped in, not when the cuffs clicked closed, but in that moment, he lost. Because he couldn't hold the gaze of the man he tried to break. Because justice had a face now. And it looked like Harold Thomas. The courthouse on Grand Concourse hadn't seen a crowd like this in years. Reporters packed the steps. Cameras flashed like lightning. Protesters and supporters stood shoulder to shoulder, their chants mixing with the wind, echoing off stone and steel like war drums. Inside, tension dripped from the walls. Carlos "Crush" Mendoza was about to stand trial, not just for murder, but for something rarer, betrayal of the community that once feared him. The case was explosive. The evidence, undeniable. Dozens of hours of footage collected by Jasmine. Leaked financial records from Tony's investigation. Bodycam footage recovered by Miguel that showed deliberate inaction by corrupt officers. But it was the testimonies that shattered the courtroom walls. A 13-year-old boy took the stand and, with trembling hands, described the night he watched Crush force his cousin to stab someone just to earn his beads. A mother spoke of losing both sons to the gang, one to a grave, the other to prison, because there was nowhere else to go. And then, there was Harold. He didn't dress for war that day. No black coat, no boots, just a pressed gray suit, a maroon tie, and a photo of Malik tucked into his inner pocket like a shield. The courtroom fell silent as he stepped into the witness box. Even Crush looked away. Harold spoke slowly, deliberately, not out of fragility but weight. Every sentence felt like it had been carved from stone. "I don't speak today as a soldier, or a vigilante. I speak as a grandfather, who lost everything." He paused, holding the jury in the palm of his hand. "My grandson was not in a gang. He didn't sell drugs. He didn't hurt anyone. He had dreams. He had plans. And they were stolen. By a man who built a kingdom out of pain." Crush looked up, eyes narrow. Harold locked eyes with him, and didn't blink. "You didn't just kill Malik," he said. "You killed every chance this neighborhood had at believing in the future. And now, you'll answer for that." When Harold stepped down, the judge asked if he'd like to remain in court for the remainder of the trial. He simply said, "I've already seen everything I need to." The trial lasted 17 days. The jury returned in 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Racketeering. Murder. Obstruction. Criminal conspiracy. Tampering with evidence. Corruption. Life sentence. No parole. The courtroom exploded. Some cried. Others laughed nervously, as if the weight of fear was finally leaving their lungs. But Harold? He didn't cheer. He simply stood, looked once more at Crush, now shackled, hollow, no longer a king, and walked out. In the weeks that followed, the wave rippled wide. 4 more officers were indicted. The mayor was forced to respond publicly. The governor ordered an audit of youth outreach programs across the 5 boroughs. A dozen smaller Trinitario chapters disbanded or fled. But more importantly, the Bronx changed. Not completely, but visibly. Kids painted murals over graffiti. Jasmine launched a youth leadership program funded by anonymous donations. Tony started a boxing gym for at-risk teens. Miguel was promoted to lead an internal anti-corruption task force. And Harold? He went quiet again. The cameras stopped calling. The interviews dried up. The world moved on. But Harold didn't. Every Sunday, he walked to the alley where Malik died, now transformed into a memorial garden with benches, candles, and a plaque that read, "Malik Thomas, you lit the way." He didn't cry. He just sat. Let the wind carry the names of the dead. Let the silence speak the truth. 1 year later, a girl no older than 13 sat beside him on the bench. She didn't speak at first. Then she asked softly, "Is it true? You fought the Trinitarios all by yourself?" Harold smiled gently. "No," he said. "I just refused to sit still. And the right people stood up with me." She paused, then asked, "Do you think someone like me could fight too? For something?" Harold looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't think. I know." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded page. A quote from Baldwin that Malik used to keep taped above his desk. "The place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it." The girl stared at it, then tucked it into her backpack. When she left, Harold sat alone once more. A man with nothing left to prove. A soldier who never wanted war, but answered the call anyway. A grandfather who couldn't bring his boy back, but had made sure the next one had a chance. And as the sun dipped behind the skyline of the Bronx, Harold Thomas stood and walked home. Would you have stood up like Harold did? Or would you have waited, hoping someone else would do it for you? Harold didn't want to be a hero. He didn't even want to be seen. But when justice failed, he remembered the most powerful lesson of all. Change doesn't come from waiting. Comes from standing. Let us know in the comments. What would you have done? And what will you do if it's your turn next? If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Because the world needs less fear and more people like Harold Thomas.